Hello everybody, this is ManuS and welcome back to another Eternal News video here on my channel. Today we're gonna talk about the balance changes that are gonna drop later today. They were just announced last night, and as expected there will be some hits to some of the more popular strategies like even Elysian. But we'll take a look in detail and I'll give you my thoughts on that. And before we do, you know the drill. Hit the subscribe button down below, turn on the notification icon, and make sure your adblock is turned off or has YouTube whitelisted to help support your favorite content. Alright, let's take a look. These are the balance changes. First off, changes aimed at Throne. So the Spell Shaper now costs 3 instead of 2. So it's overall a 5 cost play, 2 spellcrafted, which is pretty big. The card was very strong and very efficient, but still 4 power is not nothing without deploying a body. Sure, it uses a bounce on an opposing unit, but if they kill the unit with a removal of their own, the impact is sort of mitigated. But the card was extremely powerful, so I'm not too surprised that they're gonna change it. I'm not sure how this affects the playability of Spell Shaper though. It might very well be that the card is not really very playable anymore now. I think at most maybe as a one-off in markets, because at 5 the effect is just a bit too late and a bit too clunky and unwieldy, I think. But I guess it's not easy to sort of rebalance the card in a meaningful way. Like, this seems like a very reasonable way to do so, but there might not be enough nuance potential to go from very good to fine, and instead here we kind of might have lost the card for most constructed purposes, but I'm not sure. This is particularly aimed at even Elysian, which is kind of interesting. Like, we didn't play a traditional version in the ECQ, we played a like Plague Wind heavy version, basically touch of battle plus ping effects to kill opposing units easily or just wipe the entire board. And while we were running Spell Shaper, we were not running Equivocate, and now we can just go ahead and swap Spell Shaper with Equivocate, and the deck is still mostly functional. It certainly lost power level, but our list wasn't even that good of a Spell Shaper list because we played a lot more like small utility units to synergize with Touch of Battle and less good stat units, like no Sand Warrior, no Grazer and stuff like that. So we'll see how much that affects the archetype and its viability overall. I could totally see the deck still being a tier 1 deck, just not as dominant probably, which might be a fine outcome. They also mentioned that they rather change cards around even-handed Golem than Golem itself, because they like sort of the unique thing that Golem does and incentivizes, and yeah, don't want to like take that away and just tone down the tools. And obviously making Spell Shaper an even cost card is a big part in that, which is probably also the reason why they made the Spell Shaper cost 3 and not the Spellcraft. So the card is not viable anymore at all in even, because as a 5 cost even card, the card would have actually been like still pretty good in even, because normally on 5 you play a 4 cost card, and now you have a 5 cost card on 5 that is pretty powerful, and the deck would have probably played the card more than any other deck once it costs 5 in total, and that's clearly not what they want. And then Teacher of Humility is getting hit again. Been a while since the last hit. But yeah, now it's a 3-2 instead of a 3-3. They mentioned that the change to Torch becoming slow reduced its play rate a lot, which was the point, but also made yeah, Teacher even harder to deal with efficiently and more punishing, especially when you're on the draw and you can't even like turn 1, end of turn, torch it and then play a 2-drop. It forces you to skip your turn 2 play to torch it, and or play a turn 2 play and then risk getting punished by removal. So yeah, now it's a 3-2. That change is really big, especially given the release of the new market spell in Fire that deals 2, that now kills this. before. There wasn't really a whole lot of like deal 2 damage stuff in Constructed because it just doesn't line up that well. But that market card provides enough things in one card that you wanted, despite 2 damage not being ideal. And now with Teacher being a 3/2, that's a huge bump to that card, and inversely a significant hit to Teacher. I'm not sure how much play Teacher will see overall. I think it will probably still remain in even Elysian decks, and especially in our list, it isn't that big of a deal because it, in my opinion, wasn't that essential to the plan that we had with even Elysian. But it certainly increases our like random early game high roll power level, and also defense, since Teacher as a 3/3 played important defense role against a bunch of smaller units lying around, and now as a 3/2 trades with most things that are on the board. And last but not least, we get another change to a time card that isn't aimed at even, because they generally felt like time unit heavy aggressive decks and mid-range decks were a bit too dominant lately and pushing like 3 faction and non-time aggressive strategies out of the format, in their opinion. Not sure if that's necessarily how it works. I, for example, didn't feel like time aggressive strategies, other than like even time decks, were actually particularly great against 3 faction decks, especially against Winchest. Like, I really liked our matchup against Elysian Tempo, against Combre aggro, against Praxis midrange stuff. So I really didn't feel like time affected the 3 faction stuff. The 3 faction stuff is more affected right now by just an overall influx in powerful proactive synergy strategies like even Elysian, Shrine type stuff. That's what is pushing the 3 faction like good stuff decks out, I think. But it's certainly true that the time aggressive decks are much more viable than other aggressive strategies, and not sure if toning down time aggressive strategies is going to increase viability of non-time aggressive strategies. My guess would be not that much. It probably just overall decreases viability of aggressive strategies, but we'll have to see about that, because I feel like the problem with non-time aggressive strategies is not that they are worse options than time, but that they are just not, that they are general just like not good enough options for aggressive decks, in my experience from what I tried, because you know me, I like a good proactive aggressive deck, and most of those have been pretty weak in the last year or so, because the card quality and good stuff tendencies are just too high, and you're like average 2/1 Warcry only Ronin has a pretty hard life these days. Anyway, the changes: Borderlands Lookout is now an 0/2 instead of an 0/1, and only gets +1 strength for each type of influence the enemy player has, instead of being an 0/1 that gets +1/+1. So now it's like a 2/2 or a 3/2 against 3 faction stuff, rather than a 2/3 or a 3/4, which is a pretty big change, but it makes sense. Like, Lookout was pretty pushed, and I was quite surprised how good the card was when it came out. I never quite felt like it was a problem in general, but it was very strong, and it was particularly punishing to 3 faction decks, especially ones leaning on like damage-based removal, like Yennefer, for example. Borderlands Lookout was a nightmare for Yennefer decks, while against Winchest it didn't really matter much. You had like Suffocate and Defiance and Annihilate, so you could deal with it pretty handily if you wanted to, even like Aramod's designs. But yeah, I guess this will make like non-hard removal 3 faction stuff a bit more viable. They also mentioned that they reviewed the various Kindling Carver sacrifice decks that have emerged, but so far these decks have not proven too rampant or dominant. That, I think, might be more due to the dominance of even Elysian and overshadowing these, especially with the adaptation of like 1 damage sweepers and Touch of Battle being like really good against the Carver decks. But overall, I think the Carver Shrine decks are problematically powerful, and this will probably show now with even Elysian being taken down a notch. I would expect the Carver decks to take over and be really powerful. The decks just felt really disgusting. We tested them for the ECQ a lot, and we were planning on playing it for quite some time until we just realized how much that even Elysian is even more broken and more well-rounded with touch plus pings to beat unit decks and decree to beat like reactive decks and combo decks. But yeah, we'll see how that plays out. I think there might be changes to like the Carver Shrine type stuff in the next balance patch if I had to bet. Anyway, on to expedition changes. Once again, Spell Shaper affects expedition as well. So it was kind of like a 2 birds with 1 stone type of thing, since apparently I haven't played much expedition since the set came out, just a little bit on the first day because of the ECQ being thrown. But apparently the Elysian Sky stack has really taken off and taken over, and Spell Shaper obviously is amazing in that. Putting Spell Shaper on a flyer is great. Putting it on 4 to like make sure you win the races is huge. So not too surprised that this card has been really, really good there. And I guess that's part of why they changed it, because they wanted to affect that deck in Expedition and even Elysian in Throne. So seems like a pretty smart catch-all. Then Skyrider Vanguard is now a 3-1 for 5 instead of a 2-1 for 3. That's a bit surprising. I actually built my first Flyers deck yesterday on stream and tried that a bit. And there are actually a ton of options how to build it and what cards to play. And Skyrider Vanguard was one of the cards that I cut towards the end when putting together the first 75, because I felt the fact that it affects your board after combat. So for the next turn, I didn't like it as much as some of the other like more standalone, less synergy dependent options and less fragile options like Acquisitive Crow, stuff like that. Maybe it should have been in my deck, I'm not sure. I just literally just started testing the archetype, but the deck felt good and did pretty well yesterday without Vanguard. This is an indicator maybe that Vanguard is better than I thought and maybe should be in the deck depending on how you build it. But yeah, it's gonna be gone now, so no big deal. Next change is Daring Griffin is now a 3-1 instead of a 3-2. So yeah, not too surprised. The card's very good. Bit surprised by that change. Not sure how much that does. I guess it makes it a little easier to like trade with, or with like stat-based removal answer the unit that the Exalted is put on. But it seems like a bit of an odd change. I guess it also lets you easier eat the Griffin with its Reckless in combat by like just trading with like a 1-attack flyer or something. But overall, it seems like a bit of a weird change on a card where the health doesn't matter as much as normally, because any spell that you play to try and deal with the Griffin itself will trigger its ability and Exalted anyway, so it only kind of matters on stuff that you target. I think the card will mostly remain unaffected in play rate by this. It's just a very good card, and its core functionality hasn't changed. It, I guess, just will be slightly easier to fight back against, which is the point. So I guess if they didn't want to affect the card a whole lot, just like very subtly open up a little bit, that might be a reasonable change. Or as they said, we hope that this change preserves the card as a powerful option against sweepers and other high impact spells, while reducing the quantity of games in which it makes a flying threat unassailable by damage. Like I said, this will also increase the options available for getting it off the table without playing a spell. So yeah, now you can ping it with stuff like Blue Invoker, for example. Not too relevant, probably. Then Edict of Grodov now costs 4. Edicts were designed to help stabilize metagames that have gone too far, like Shafkar's Edict before it. Edict of Grodov have proven too efficient in the worst case scenario. Its widespread usage has had a chilling effect on expensive Primal and Shadow cards, and it is a card that we have been watching closely in both the previous Expedition and in Throne. And yeah, now the card I think is unplayably bad. 4 is way too much. I don't think the card is even a market option anymore. I think the card is straight up dead. I'm a bit surprised by that change. I felt the card was pretty reasonably costed. And I don't know, maybe they could have changed the functionality a bit, but changing the cost to 4 I think just kills the card. 4 mana, like, interaction is just too bad, even in Expedition most of the time, and also too clunky for a market card, which is what the Edicts mostly are. So yeah, a bit unfortunate, but I guess once again a card that at least hasn't made it in my first version of Elysian Skies yesterday, but I assume a lot of people are running it, and that's part of why it got changed. The same way that it was main decked in a lot of Elysian midrange decks during the Xenon era, where it made sense, so I think it depends on the metagame, how much sense it makes to play it main. And then they reverted their buff to Entrancer in the from the past. Now it only hits cards which cost 3 or less, not 4 or less anymore. To further tone down the quality of the Elysian Skies deck, because this is a premium 2-drop for 1-drop for the deck, and they felt like it invalidates too many units. I guess also potential flyers to come down from the opponent you can just silence in their hand, and then they have an even harder time stabilizing against your flying force. And they also felt like that the new strangers were a bit too pushed, which is not unreasonable. Grodov's Stranger was taken down from 7/7 to 6/6, which I think is actually reasonable. The card does a lot, has a lot of utility, and a 6-cost 6/6 that generates card advantage and threatens to generate even more card advantage. Seems pretty good. So now it's closer, and like if we look at old Heart of the Vault, 6-cost 6/6, this is obviously not as powerful, especially because it needs to attack once to do so. But once it attacks once, it's basically as good as Heart of the Vault, so taking it down by a 1/1 instead makes sense, and the card is still probably going to be mostly intact and as viable in any deck that wanted it as before. And ManuS Stranger went down from a 5/3 to a 4/3, which is fine. I think the card is still mostly just going to play the same as before. I don't think it was too much about the attack stats of the unit. And then we get some small expedition-based buffs. Kodosh's Armor and ManuS Quiver get buffed. Kodosh's Armor now costs 4 to give a single faction +5/+5 this turn instead of 5. I don't think that changes that much. I think the card's still pretty weak. And ManuS Quiver now spellcrafts for 1 instead of 2, which is neat. The card has some interesting potential. That card might have some use now. I didn't hate the card when I first saw it. And then we have Willbreaker, which is now a 1/2 instead of a 1/1. If I'm not mistaken, he is an Unseen, so he might fit into the Unseen Argenport deck, although I don't think the card usually makes it, and I doubt the card will make it with that change. Helps a bit against flyers with the summon and has Corrupted, but I still feel like the card is unlikely to make it, but the +1 health means that the Shade also sticks around for 1 more turn, which is nice. So it's a subtle but more impactful buff than it seems, although I doubt the card is going to be too relevant in Expedition. So yeah, the balance changes will go live today, and as they say, in order to ensure players competing in the Expedition Spring Challenge on March 6 have time to prepare. So there's another Expedition Challenge coming up. That's the balance changes. We'll see how they shake out. Let me know in the comments what you think of the changes and my assessment of them. And as usual, leave a like if you enjoy the content, subscribe, turn on the notification icon, share it with your friends, leave a comment, and make sure your ad block is turned off to help support us content creators on YouTube for free. That's it again for this time. Thank you for watching. I'm your host, ManuS. I'll see you next time. Bye.